And welcome to Table Talk TV, your source for the source. Hopefully you guys are ready for episode 001, the beginning of what is to be many more. Hopefully your curiosity is piqued. We have two other participants, associates, colleagues, whatever you want to call them. I guess their technical name is colleague and associate. It feels like some kind of
it feels like an intro video.
Yeah. Well, anyways, today we're going to be talking about the image of God. There's a lot of ideas and contemplation over that, a lot of mystery over it. So hopefully you guys are ready and in tune for this insightful conversation.
Well, I found it interesting, I guess. I've always found it interesting. You know, at the plain reading of Genesis, it just says that Adam was created in God's image.
Well, I guess I can go ahead and read it for those who may not know what we're talking about. In Genesis 1:26, it says, "Then God said, 'Let us make man in our image after our likeness, and let them have dominion over the fish of the sea, and over the birds of the heavens, and over the livestock, and over the earth, and over every creeping thing that creeps on the earth.'" And that's Genesis 1:26. So the construct is, what is this? Let us make man in our image after our likeness. It's just an interesting thought, though, when you think about it, because like if I create an image of something, what would that be called? It'd be a replication of something. But it's interesting that when you think of the Ten Commandments, the first one is not to make a graven image. And the idea is that it's supposed to be a replication of something that clearly God doesn't like. But that's a replication. It's an image. So what I always thought was interesting, if we imply that humans, the image of God is actually a physical shape of God, we would be an idol. We would actually be something God created that looks like him.
Well, that's the problem. That a lot of people say, if it's just a literal image, God didn't have a shape in those days. He didn't have a fleshy body in that time. So he couldn't have made Adam in his image. He doesn't have an image. So it must mean something more, is what they usually say.
Well, usually what I've heard people imply that this is the pre-incarnate Christ. And because we assume the fact that, I think what it's in Hebrews and Colossians, that Christ is the one that created everything.
You're not going to find Reformed people saying that. I haven't found anybody say that yet.
Well, the implication, there's a lot of people who believe it's the image because they connect it to humanity. But what they usually connect it to, how you're going to get to a physical image, is because you have to connect the idea that Jesus himself has an image. And if you believe Jesus himself created everything, he has to create material things as a material thing. Now, he might be a spiritual thing, but there has to be something. It can't just be nothing.
You're saying, so Jesus had the shape of a man, and therefore he created man in that shape.
That would be the idea for those who believe it was a physical shape, the pre-incarnate Christ. It's not like, I think a colleague before told me that some of these rabbis believe that Adam might have had a tail or something, right? But it'd be weird to think that Jesus Christ in some pre-incarnate state had a tail. So if the idea wants to be believed, that those who believe is a physical thing, you would assume that whatever that physical thing is a replication of Christ, because he created everything. He would be the God that creates everything. And that would be whatever Christ looks like. It wouldn't be with a tail or 10 faces or something. It'd just be whatever Adam is, because that's what Christ would come in. And how you would assume that is the incarnate Christ. And since the incarnate Christ comes as whatever his shape is, you don't want to say that Christ is submissive or subservient to Adam's fall. Because if you assume Christ had a state, let's say Adam had a tail. That means that Christ came in the shape of Adam without a tail, because Christ was submissive or subordinate to the function of Adam after the fall. So whatever God made Adam as in the beginning, you have to assume that's what Christ looked like in the beginning. Because if Christ comes afterwards without a tail, that would assume that Christ now is subordinate to the fall, because that means Adam now doesn't have a tail because of the fall.
Well-
You don't want to go down those roads.
How would you explain, I guess, when God was like, let me show you my back, Moses? Like, how would you, I guess, just explain that aspect of it? Because
But that would be
Moses
the
saw
idea
that.
of the pre-incarnate
Right.
Christ.
Okay.
Or, I mean, a lot of people could say it was angelic. Like God used angels as the messengers. That would be like the apostles of the Old Testament. And that was God's way of communicating directly with those people because he didn't incarnate himself. He hasn't manifested in physical form. So he's using still angelic or spiritual creatures as messengers because it says that Moses received the 10 Commandments from angels. So the idea is maybe this back was a representation of Christ's pre-incarnate context or an angelic context, but it still doesn't materialize. It's not like Moses saw the literal, physical back of Christ. It might have been an angel's back, or it might have been like the pre-incarnate imagery. It's just like the idea of when Moses goes over to the burning bush and the bush tells him that you're on holy ground, take off your shoes. It's not like Christ is actually a bush.
There's many implications throughout the whole Old Testament. Daniel sees one like the Son of Man. He has a human appearance, and this is before Christ was born, and we know he's talking about Christ. So he's talking about Christ before Christ was born, and before Christ was born, he had this human appearance. So yeah, it begs the question, who had this human appearance first? Was it us or Christ? And I think the New Testament would say, according to Paul, if Christ is the image of the invisible God, then we got our image from Christ.
But that's the issue is this image of God a context of something literal, or is this image of God something more implicative, like it's a symbology or a imagery of something that has a more significant meaning? So that's where like the reformers would take it more of a moral character. It's something that God has impressed into you that makes you different than the rest of the creatures. You have the ability to adhere to God's grace, God's calling, God's obedience to righteousness, the adherence or the access to know what is good and know what is not good, compared to the animals that may not ever have the idea of knowing what is good or not. And that distinguishment is the image of God. That's what the reformers would correlate.
Yeah, they call it perfection, holiness, and righteousness. But yeah, to Associate's point, those are attributes, not images. So if we're going to take it symbolically, like you're saying, or it's figurative, it means something else other than image, then yeah, I don't know why the Hebrew would actually say image here. Now, they could use the word likeness and say likeness is some kind of attributive quality.
If you look at it, like, before Adam and Eve sinned, like, they had, like, God said it was good, and so, like, you see them reigning over, like, the fish in the sea and the birds in the air, and, like, all these other things, and, like, probably the best way that you possibly could, because after the fall, it talks about, like, now the fish and the birds and everything will fear you, and, like, all these other things. So why can't it just actually, like, be both? Because, like, if you look at, like, I don't know, I think about, like, modern day society with, like, the sin of idolatry specifically is, like, now we can, like, look at these people's attributes in their life, like, I don't even know, but you can just see, like, oh, they're rich, and that's, like, the thing that I idolize is, like, this richness about them, or, oh, they're, like, this specific aspect of, like, this is the kindness that I would like to see in my life. And so I don't know, that's just a thought, I guess, but why can't it just be both if it says image and likeness?
Well, I think that goes to a larger question, which is if you assume that there is something more than a physical image, let's just assume that whatever we look like today is how Adam was made.
Right.
And that's never changed. Like, let's assume that's just what it is. That's now assuming that when he got banished from Eden, nothing changed also except maybe context. But if you add anything else, let's say you add a moral character, let's say you add some kind of dominion mandate or anything, what this assumes then is that something had to be lost. Because the construct in the future is the Bible says that Christ comes to make everything new, and we're supposed to conform into the image of Christ. This conformity implies that there's something that you were that you're not, so you have to be transformed or conformed into something that is the fullness of whatever this image of Christ is. And so the idea for the reformers is, well, we're going to add this moral character because it makes sense that if this moral character was lost, or this access to understand good, Christ can restore that in what's called the new creation. When he says, I've come to make everything new. All things of old are passed away. And then Paul talks in Romans 8:28 to say you're going to be conformed into the image and likeness of Christ. This conformity is what the reformers would say that's why it was lost. If you don't add it there, it puts a strange context of what is this conformity, at least into the reformers' eyes. It's like, what are you conforming into this image if Adam never lost anything? That's their context. So they would say, I agree with you. It is probably some kind of physical construct, but more importantly, what was lost? It was the lost ability to have this relationship with God through understanding of what is righteousness or not, or eating of the tree of life. And since that was taken away when they got banished from Eden, Christ is going to give that to you because he is the tree of life. And so that's why they added.
That's what's tough, though. There's nothing in the text anywhere in the whole Bible, actually, that says we lost the image. In fact, everything says we still have the image. Nothing says we lost it. But yeah, if you say that image means holiness, perfection, and righteousness, then that means, and then Adam fell, that means he lost that. So that means he lost the image. He lost his holiness. Right. Yeah, or at least a part of it. That's what they say. But they're not saying that anymore. So here's Anthony Hoekema, created in God's image. All the reformers know this guy very well. They quote from him extensively. He says that Adam and Eve lost the image. I just read a book recently from the new reformers, and they're not saying that Adam and Eve lost the image anymore. They're now not saying that it's holiness, perfection, and righteousness anymore either. They're actually saying it's just the cultural mandate, only the cultural mandate to have dominion over the earth.
What do they mean by cultural mandate? Like you're talking about societal?
Yeah, like we
creation
need to
care?
Yeah, so they're saying that the image is now it's not holiness, perfection, and righteousness anymore, because that is obviously, it's never worked. Augustine came up with the idea, and the reformers like him carried it. Luther and Calvin and all the rest. But now, I don't know if we can call it neo-reformers, but you read any reformers now, they're going to go after Beale's construct, G.K. Beale, which would have it that our whole objective, the image, is defined as rule and dominion. That is God's image, to be kings on earth and to go forth and multiply, literally take over this world for Christ. It's a very post-millennial view, but you're not going to find any reformers that say anything
other than that. But
Beale
does believe in the Eden restored. Yeah, which means the completion of whatever was lost in Eden. There was something lost, and that completion is in your sanctification.
So they don't say it's lost; they say it's skewed. So everybody still, unbelievers and believers, still have the image of God. We're not even missing a part of it anymore. Magically, this guy will tell you we lost it. This is an old reformer. The new reformers will say we haven't lost the image; it's been skewed now.
Okay, so then maybe that's fine. It all means the same thing. Maybe you have a veil. Maybe nothing's left, and you can just say, so the image had a veil put upon it, and through Christ, that veil has been removed. And what is that, 1 Corinthians 5, I think he says, if the gospel has a veil, it's only to those who are perishing because the God of this world has blinded their eyes. So then maybe you could take that context and say, the image had a veil on it. I guess it still doesn't change anything. Something has to be restored.
Well, it fixes the big problem that there's nothing in the text anywhere. In fact, in Genesis 9, Noah is told that you're not allowed to kill anybody because man is in the image of God currently. So they're not even a part of it's missing. And that's been a big problem for the reformers. So they did fix that little, actually there's a lot of implications, but we're not going to go into all that.
Well, the reason what I've read, and I was looking into that this past week, the most common notion that a lot of these reformers believe that this context in Genesis 9 is talking about is the reason why it's sinful is because you're destroying the image, which is a replication of the demand mandate. And if you destroy the image of God, you're actually blaspheming who God is, which is the ultimate king or dominion individual. So killing humans is blasphemous towards the dominion mandate.
That's right. Because that is now what they're defining as the image of God now.
Yeah.
It's not holiness, perfection, and righteousness anymore. It's the dominion mandate. That is the new image. And that's why I was saying, if it's so concrete, then how can we, and if it's not arbitrary, we're not just throwing arbitrary definitions onto this word image that just means image in Hebrew and the Semitic languages surrounding it in that culture. And it's so sad. This guy, Hoekema, will tell you, that's what the word meant. The Hebrew word for image actually means statue, shadow, to cut, to shape. That's actually what it meant, not just in Hebrew, but in all the Semitic languages surrounding the Hebrew culture. And then he just jumps to, that's why it means holiness, perfection, and righteousness. It's like, how did you get from point A to point B? Literally the very next page. And I've always been shocked at that. Like nobody, and I've asked many Reformed pastors, nobody can give me an answer. How do we got to the conclusion that image means holiness, perfection, and righteousness?
Well, I've read a lot of reformers, like the old schools, like Owen and Edwards and Boys, and they correlate the same construction that I reiterated earlier, which is if there's an implication of conformity that has something to do with a restrictive access, they would probably say it was loss, then Christ is going to restore that. I think they utilize 1 Corinthians 15 where it says that you are made of a perishable body. But with Christ, since he's coming to restore, you're conforming or sanctifying into a imperishable body, which would be your glorification. But that sanctificational process is the restoration of that fallen image in Adam. So they will go down those roads. That sanctification is the restoring of the original perfect image. Luther would probably say the same thing. I think he correlated something like he was a Superman. Like he could have been like the super being, Adam. And so if that was lost, that's what's happening with Christ. We're being reconformed into this super image, and that's why he's the new image. That's what at least they would say.
Or the new reformers just saying that we are made in his image in the likeness of like dominion now. And
a lot of this comes back to what they would consider what's called neo-orthodoxy. Mm-hmm. It's more of something that's we would call maybe a postmodern idea. And a lot of that is correlated specifically because of the culture. It's a subjective format. Like, how do you make the biblical context relative? If it has to do with dominion, that just simply means you're human.
Right.
So that's like go out there and be a good steward of the earth, or be a good example of that you're kind to people, loving to people. And Adam was supposed to do that. And because he failed, we are now in a restrictive access to be a good steward. But through Christ, we are being restored this humanity, this ability to be human, to be a good steward of the earth, a good replication of who Christ is, which is kind to people and loving humanity. And that's a part of the dominion mandate. And so what they'll say is, as more Christians dominate the earth like Adam was supposed to, then you're going to show humanity in its fullness, which they'll say you can see through Christ. If we all acted like Christ, then we would demonstrate what humanity is supposed to be like, and that's the dominion mandate. We need to control the functions of the earth so that we can, or have dominion, so we can demonstrate what real humanness is. And unless the world sees this real humanness, the world's always going to be in this fallen state. But this fallen state can be restored if we Christians have dominion over the earth. We can fix that unhuman state. That's the majority of the dominion mandate. And yeah, that can lead into things like Christian nationalism.
So here is something.
Yes.
Yeah, this is just a real easy way to think about it. So Adam broke something. And whatever Adam broke, Christ has to restore. So it's really that simple. So usually what reformers say is that this is the covenant of works, where Adam could have literally worked his way to heaven and worked all of our way to heaven. Christ literally wasn't even needed. The cross was not needed either. But then when Adam fell, he broke something. And then Christ had to fix it. So the covenant of works ended here, and the covenant of grace started here under Christ.
Yeah, this is how the reformers would see it, right?
Yes, this is the Reformed view.
Right.
Now, if you're Baptist, you might put Christ over here. So this is all the covenant of works back here, and then Christ, the new covenant of works, or the covenant of grace afterwards. But that doesn't matter. Whatever Adam broke, Christ fixed. So if Adam broke the dominion mandate, that's what Christ is going to restore. If Adam was holy, perfect, and righteous, and then broke that, then that's what Christ had to restore. So whatever Adam broke in the beginning is what Christ has fixed.
And a lot of times, a lot of people, they package this. It's not just, because when you say something like humanness is something that's more generalized. You know, you could put anything in humanness, right? You could say holy, perfect, righteous, kind, creation care, take care of dogs. You could put anything in there. But the whole idea is whatever you put into this package, Adam didn't comply. And so Christ has to fix whatever you want to put in this package called humanness. And that's why the critical scholars just call this the divine image, because whatever that package is, that's what God is. And therefore, Adam now can't be that divine image anymore. And Christ is going to restore that divine image in us through sanctification. But you know, there's other people that take the idea that it's like, there's a guy named Gordon Clark, and he's a Presbyterian. And he believes that this is more of what you would just consider logic, that it's more of the ability to understand and process and comprehend the differences between things. It's not really so much a moral character, because he would say a moral character is actually a byproduct of logic. You couldn't choose what is good or bad or even understand such things if you didn't have logic. So the image of God is actually more of the accessibility to even comprehend the distinguishments between categories. And then you can now rightly assess. But because Adam failed, you have now irrational or not very logical people. And now they can't distinguish what is obviously good and obviously bad because Adam lost that logic. So that's another idea. It's not just moral character, it's just now just pure logic is corrupted.
Yeah, Holkema puts another thing, and again, this is well known to the reformers. He says, man's true freedom, which he lost in the fall, is restored in the process of redemption. So that's another thing that they say we lost, was freedom. Adam broke his rights to have free will, and then Christ restores that. That's only if you're in Christ, though, then you get that free will back. The freedom to choose between good and evil, and there's different breakoffs with all that too. That was page 234.
Gordon Clark, he touches that too, because he says that's a part of logic. Mm-hmm. It's but he's pretty high up there on the deterministic scale. But in the idea of the illusionary construct, like I don't want to go into single predestination or double predestination, but the idea that, do you believe we all have free will? We're just in our nature, but we lost the access to choose good, or so you have all the free will you want, but it's only within sin. So you have this restricted construct of free will, but it's not too really restricted because you're acting upon your nature. But when Christ comes, he restores the fullness of that nature. Now you can distinguish what is good or not, because now you have a second option that seemed to never be there before. I guess that may be what Joachim is alluding to with the free will, because a reformer is not going to believe in absolute free will, like libertarian free will. There's going to be some kind of compatibilistic free will.
Well, that's one of my biggest fears, is if we can literally just arbitrarily throw any definition we want to into the image of God, then what's to stop us from throwing these gender ideologies or some kind of political thing in there? Anything. It's like, look, the image means logic, it means free will, it means holiness, perfection, righteousness. What else? What else are we gonna throw in there? We can just throw it all. It's the image is a pretty big box. We just throw it all in there, and that's what Adam lost, and that's what Christ gives us back. So it's great. It's just arbitrary. We could just say it's whatever we want it to be.
I think they do that.
I know.
That's what I'm saying. The postmodern individuals, like, our more liberal theologians today, it's just called humanness. And Christ is the fulfillment of this totality of humanness. And it can be anything. As I say earlier, you could put a dog, you could be nice to dogs. You could be, a creation care, don't pollute. all those things. If you really love God, then you'll say He said everything is good. That means you're going to love everything because He's
Dominion
omnibenevolent.
mandate,
Yeah, and it's all part of the dominion mandate, right? And so
it's just arbitrary. That's why I say we need to go back at some point. There has to be some kind of anchor, some kind of objective anchor or standard that we could stand on. And that's why I just go back to the original word. The word means image. That's what it means.
The last thing that I've read that a lot of people believe in too, more of these critical scholars that hold that it's divine image, they also associate with that as in being because of the community-centric idea of these ancient Mesopotamian regions, that it's also a part of being the family, or you're a child of God. And through Adam, what was lost was this discontinuity to be a child of God. And Christ is restoring that continuity of being back to the divine image or divine counsel, or being a part of this family of God. So the image is more of like a signet ring, you are a walking signet ring that is now somewhat cracked, and Christ is going to fix this signet ring.
Yeah, I know they do the same thing to those ancient texts that they do to the Old Testament, unfortunately. They take things out of context. If you actually go to the sources where they get these Mesopotamian documents, if you actually read the document itself, they're doing the same thing. And they actually hint at it too, so they know what they're doing. So when they say, and look, see, image over here is directly linked to a king's son. So therefore, we can say that image means kingship. And so they use the word linked. It's linked to it. It could imply it. These are words that they use. And then they say, therefore, we know that this word image means kingship.
Well, specifically what I was reading, they didn't refer anything to kingship. They specifically were saying it's divine image, which means like a idol of God.
Yeah, that's actually what it means.
And they were saying that this is a representation of you are a part of his family, nothing to do with kings. And what Adam, when he fell away or when he got excommunicated, this disassociated his relationship or his familyness to God. And through Christ, he fixes this broken familyness. Had nothing to do with kingness, because they were saying specifically in these collective cultures, these really ancient collective cultures, they were trying to say it wasn't so much a king thing as much as just divine image and family.
Well, maybe they're shifting again, like they keep doing, but
what they're saying, it's like a unique family because we are different species. Like when God created humans, we are everything. Like these scholars would say, everything is part of the family of God. It doesn't matter, fish, birds, air, anything, angels. But we are a special or a unique part of the family of God, being the image of God. And since we're a divine image, they're not divine images. We are. And we are like a little signet, like a little idol or like a representation. And what was broken was this divine image. And Jesus Christ restores that brokenness.
If they're saying that, then the image still means image. It still means idol, signet. It still means that. So
they're just implying on what the symbology for the Mesopotamian people were trying to say.
I'd have to check their sources. But any thoughts, associate?
I guess the only thoughts that I have is like, I don't know, you guys were just talking and I was thinking about like the prodigal son. Just the fact that like he left and then like spent all his money doing whatever he wanted. And then he came back and the father like sees his son, runs up, hugs him. And then he's like, all right, give me the ring, give me the robe, everything else. And, you know, I don't remember exactly what it says afterwards, but probably something about the kingdom of heaven. So I guess how would you explain that? Because like if we are those people who are running away, doing those things, and then we come back and then we're given a robe and everything else, I guess what does that also represent?
Well, if you apply that to the image, you make an assumption.
Right.
Because that parable has a presupposition attached to it, which is that there's a ruler, there's a king. So what you have to assume, if you're correlating that with the image, is that the sons are heirs or they're a part of the ruling. So you're already assuming this all has to do with kingship and rulers, if you're going to correlate that directly to the image. So if you're willing to accept that, then you can already accept what the dominion mandate is propagating. But if you don't want to accept the dominion mandate of image, then you have to say that had nothing to do with the image. It's one of the two because it's begging that question.
Another problem that we could face, if you don't say that Adam is perfect, holy, and righteous, what their old definition of image was, what we do is we delete this line, and so Adam always needed Christ now. So let's say Adam was created in Christ's image, so Christ came before Adam, and he came after Adam. Christ was here first, he created Adam in his image and likeness, but now there's nothing broken. If Adam always needed to be under Christ, just like us, then there's nothing different between then and now. And what that means is that Adam was created sinful. He was created as a sinner, just like us. We're all created as sinners. And that's why we need Christ. Now, if you say that Adam was not created as a sinner, and he was holy, perfect, and righteous, the image, quote unquote, then he didn't need Christ. He was perfect all on his own. He was holy and righteous all on his own without Christ. In fact, now Christ becomes the plan B, because Adam was actually supposed to be who we bow down to for saving us all and bringing us all into heaven. But because he failed, Christ had to come and clean it up.
Yeah, but there's a lot of connotations with that, and that's why there's a lot of opposition. That's not a new idea.
No, I know. I'm just saying, I'm showing you why we can't just delete the covenant of works.
The opposition to that from the reformers would be this is a neo-nomian or an antinomian proposition, because the way we get a function of law, they would say, has to be by something that has the accessibility of being knowing and then the accessibility of disobeying. Know it, so you can disobey, and then you have to have the ability to obey or disobey. And if you flow with the function that he's already in a sinful state, that means the idea of law is kind of arbitrary except for like covenantal blessings or something, but the judgment of an eternal condemnation or eternal salvation is usually rested around the idea of justification, which has to do with, are you guilty of sin or not?
Well, yeah, you could make it work, but yeah, to your point, you'd have to say that there was always a law, and it's always to show Adam and everyone else that you're not perfect and you always need Christ, because Christ has been here since the beginning. He is why we look like this with 5 fingers, 5 toes on each hand and foot and all this. We didn't get our image from apes in evolution. We got our image from God himself. We didn't evolve this way. And I think this is actually a little secret conspiracy theory of mine, that this is why a lot of theologians have been trying to get the word image to not mean image. So that way they can say that we actually got our image from apes through evolution, because it seems like that's where a lot of people are going these days. But if image means image, that means we got our shapes not from monkeys in evolution, but from God himself. And yes, these are Christian scholars who are adopting evolution theory into their biblical understanding. But Christ could be under the covenant of works, and we could be under the covenant of grace. So Christ has always been working for our salvation, and we, including Adam, have always been under his grace. And this is how we can make it work. Maybe the only way, maybe not. I guess.
Well, the regular connotation would be there has to be a knowing accessibility. Did Adam know before, like when his eyes open? That's why there's these sequential consequences. If there is to be something he didn't know, then he can't break something because he doesn't know it. Now, if there is something that he didn't know, but then it was revealed to him, then he does know. Now he has the ability of, do I obey or disobey? So there has to be some point to where revelation is real to Adam, so then he can actually have some consequence for this revelational disobedience. If you say it's always been transcendent, that means Adam would have already been under, I guess there would be 2 laws. There'd be this universal law that he has no clue about, and then that whatever Christ is doing, there must be this universal brokenness forever that always existed that Adam would never know about. And then there'd be this human function that he would have to know about, which is maybe the dominion mandate, you could call it. And then he doesn't follow that, or he eats the tree, or whatever happens. And now he's obvious, his eyes are open, I did something I shouldn't have done. And now they can say, oh, there's a consequence for that. And it makes sense because he knew that he broke something. He can't break something he didn't know because he doesn't know that he's breaking it, and then have a consequence of this non-knowledge.
Yeah, hence the knowledge of good and evil. The tree of knowledge. It's not the tree of good and evil. It's the tree of knowledge of good and evil.
I think that's the issue. If you would say there's this invisible work of Christ, that means there's something already broken that Adam's already guilty of, but he doesn't even know it.
That's right.
Yeah, and
so
that would
that's
be
why
the
he's
hard thing.
that's why he's evil, and he doesn't know it. He has no knowledge of his evilness and God's goodness, and therefore the great chasm between the two. So he's just literally playing in the garden. God is walking in the garden with him, and Adam has no clue how good God is or how evil he is until he eats from the tree of knowledge of good and evil. Once he knows that, the first thing he does is, I need to go cover myself. So he hides himself with his wife in the midst of the trees to hide his evilness, his naked, because now his eyes are open. They see that they're naked before God. They were always naked. They just didn't know it. So this is the idea.
The genuineness though becomes hard. That's why I think a lot of people will say it's not fair. That means Adam was already set up and he was already created in sin and evil, and Adam didn't even know that.
Isn't that what we are too? I mean, you would say the same thing about your kid. Your kid.
But they'll blame it on Adam.
I know. Everybody wants to push the blame. And Adam blamed it on his wife. Ooh. Yeah, everybody loves to shift the blame. So your kid, I imagine you would say, is created by God. And your kid is a sinner. So that only means one thing. God created a sinner called your kid. And whatever you want to name your kid, that's the name of that sinner that God just created. Now, you can say you created it, but maybe God didn't create your kid. But maybe you created the kid. And then you can shift the blame. Well, I didn't do this. Adam did. So, okay, well, still, there's somebody has to be responsible for this. So.
And then what they're going to say is, before Adam's fall, if you postulate he was already guilty of something, what was he guilty of and he couldn't even know it?
I don't know. That's the big thing, but
that's what they would call that antinomian.
Well, they call it antinomian because this means that we've always been under grace. There's no hope for becoming perfect.
Well, it's because there's no real law doesn't have a real meaning, because it's every other law becomes a fake law. Because if there's an active work of Christ constantly, because the real condemnation is something you cannot know, because if Adam didn't know and he was created but already guilty, then nobody could know. And then all other laws under whatever you see in this world are not really that important, because the real active work of Christ would just be the thing that really is necessary, because that's the only thing Adam needed.
You know what's interesting is when a deaf, dumb, or blind person or handicapped person is created by God, God himself says, I create those too. He creates those with the inability to meet life's demands. So these handicapped people are never going to be able to drive, even though they can't. It's like, well, he can't drive right now as a baby. It's like, well, duh, yeah, but he won't know that he can't drive right now. That's true. Doesn't change the fact. He can't drive when he's older, but he doesn't know that yet, and that doesn't make any difference whether he knows he can't drive when he's older or not. He's just never going to be able to drive. He's handicapped, and God says, I created him that way. So why couldn't he create Adam with the same inability to meet his demands? Even though Adam didn't know his demands had to be met yet, he was created as a handicapped individual.
Well, I assume what they would say is that these deficiencies, if you say handicap, whatever, is a result of Adam's disobedience. The accessibility to these disabilities or inabilities or these restrictions or frailties is because Adam's inability to be that dominion mandate, that divine image.
Yeah, you're still putting it at, it's all because of Adam. I'm saying it's all because of God.
The reason
God himself created Adam with the inability to meet his demands.
The reason they're going to say that is because Adam couldn't have known that. And the only time that he actually could know he messed up was after he disobeyed this one thing, which is don't eat of this tree.
That's right.
If he's guilty of something beforehand, that's not fair. He wouldn't know.
A kid born...
But they're going to say is a byproduct of Adam's fallenness.
I understand that, and I'm saying prove it.
Well, they're going to... Well, we can go down now the Augustinian original sin road. But
I know. You're going to quote your apostolic fathers, and I know. I'm very familiar with them as well. And I'm going to quote to you what the Jewish people thought, what Jesus thought, what the actual Jewish people thought in the Old Testament
I don't
times.
think anybody believed that Adam himself was created sinful.
I don't know what they believed about that,
everything was created good, and God created everything good.
but they definitely didn't think Adam was a saint. They thought that everyone after him was.
No, but they thought everything is good. I've read many.
No, what I'm saying is in the Talmudic literature, we have Enoch, we have Abraham, Moses, all these people, but it goes to Seth and it ends there. It doesn't go to Adam. Mm-hmm. So even the Jews, but before Christianity, before Christ, the Jews thought that there were saints in the Old Testament, all the way back to Seth. Mm-hmm. They didn't include Adam in this. So nobody thought that Adam was a saint. Nobody.
Well, probably not. But I do know one thing I've read many times through all these rabbinic literatures. They thought no matter what it was in these creation states, all those things were good. And from fish to Adam to whatever, because God said it was good. Right. So they didn't think that he was evil.
That's right. Now, we're talking about good, not morally, because nobody's going to say God created the grasshoppers and the grass and said those are morally good creatures. But they wouldn't
say he was condemned.
No. But it's funny. You actually see this in Hebrews too, in the Hall of Faith. Adam's the only one not listed in there. It starts with Seth, so again, just in line with the rabbinic literature and what the Jews thought at the time. Adam's not a righteous man. No, everybody after him was, and they were all sinners. But Adam was worse somehow. So nobody would have thought he was in this covenant of works. He was created perfect, holy, and righteous, and all this stuff. Everybody put him lower than all the other sinners.
I assume they would say the reason he's not in there is because of the original sin doctrine. So he's not seen as somebody who would be an obedience of faith. He was the progenitor of disobedience. He was the one, if you would need magnitudes, he would be the one that needs the most grace.
The original sin doctrine is a Christian. It's not a Jewish. The Jewish
people
don't believe
I'm saying
in that.
Because, well, that's a later writing, and I guess we can argue who wrote Hebrews. But the context would be under the understanding of Christian doctrine in writing Hebrews and understanding the ideas of what they were already foundationally believing. The idea that the interpretation that Paul could have seen through Romans 5 as Adam being somebody who is responsible for all this failure in the world is not a far-fetched to think that Hebrews is negating Adam for the very same reason that Adam wouldn't have be seen as somebody who is a patriarch of faith. He would actually be seen as somebody who is one of the originators of disobedience of faith. And that's why he's not in that Hall of Fame.
Could be. We just have to check and see.
Well, we would never know. We don't know what the author of Hebrews' genuine intention would be for writing that.
We can get close to it by going back to the literature that the author of Hebrews actually quotes from. He quotes from
but the problem
the pseudepigraphal and apocryphal books.
A lot of people debate on who's actually the author of Hebrews.
No, I don't care about that. I'm saying whoever wrote it is quoting from pseudepigraphal and apocryphal literature. So they assume that those pieces of artifacts were authoritative, and therefore they assumed that their audience thought it was authoritative too, so that's why they quoted it. It's almost like when Reformed people quote John Calvin. They don't think John Calvin is scripture, but they still quote him.
That's very true, but the problem is the same thing. You talk to 10 reformers and they may have 10 different interpretations of what Calvin meant. It'd be the same thing. The interpretation of the pseudepigraphal literature, what the idea of the interpretation of the writer is trying to propagate can't be just generalized because Jews say this. There could be 10 Jews and they can interpret this interesting literature in a way that could be different from one Jew to another.
Well, bring us back, associate.
Geez, that's a lot of thoughts. I've never really heard a lot of these concepts, so I was just letting you guys talk it out. I guess just questions that was coming up in my head is like, so if God is God of justice and judgment and wrath, but also on the other side, like a God of love, mercy, grace, like you see a full, essentially like a rainbow of attributes of who God is, like his holiness. I guess why before the fall happened, why didn't he do any of that judgment, any wrath, anything else? Why was he just walking there with a child?
Like, why did he even create the tree of knowledge of good and evil to begin with?
Like, why would he just do that? So
that's a good question. A similar question is like, why would he create Satan, knowing
exactly? Yeah. Like, why did he not remove him? But also, like afterwards, after the fall, you hear Adam like admit like we're naked, like and she's the problem and whatever else. It wasn't anything that he did before he ate of the fruit. It was always just like the result of the fruit, because now he knows what is good.
But clearly something was revealed to him at that point.
Right, exactly.
And that's necessary for, especially like in a Reformed theology, it's necessary to have some kind of implicit justification for law. Like if he couldn't see it, it's hard for God to say, well, you're guilty and there's no real reason why. It's just, and you can't know why. That'd be crazy. So Adam had to see something. And that's because he understood something. And then he realized that after he broke it, because he understood it, and therefore now he can have a consequence of it. And so there's like this validity of the necessity of external law. It wasn't just some, law floating in the sky. But yeah, well, we can add more to this. That was a lot of context. But yeah, a lot of this also has to do with the philosophical quandary of evil.
Right.
And that's actually a big part of the covenant of works, is so that you can't say God is the author of sin.
Mm-hmm.
Humans are, because we freely chose to disobey God. And God, that wasn't his agenda. His agenda wasn't to condemn you. His agenda was to allow you to be one of his divine images. But because you decided to rebel, you have to face those consequences. And so to do that, that actually takes God off of the seat. Like now you can say, oh, well, God said, hey, that wasn't my choice, that was your choice. And so that's one of the implicit things of saying Adam had free will, Adam had a chance, and Adam failed. And so now God's not guilty. Adam's guilty. And that's part of the reasons for the covenant of works in the Reformers. That's why it's foundational. Of course, there's one covenant before that. It would be the covenant of redemption, but that's a whole nother thing. But as in for our reality, covenant of works takes God off the seat. Anyways, I think that was a good discussion on that, a good premise to talk about the image of God. If you guys have any questions about the things we said a whole bunch of things like associated. A lot of these things may be very new to you.
I do have some stuff from the Talmudic literature pulled up if you want to hear what they have to say about some of this stuff. It's interesting.
Maybe we could talk about it next week, do a part 2, because
Of time.
we're already running on that line.
Indian time.
Maybe we could talk about it more next week, and hopefully you guys tune in. But as always, well, in the future, as always, that is colleague, and that is associate, and I am host. And we hope
over there in the corner is Satan.
losing his religion. Hopefully you guys tune in next week. As always, have a blessed day. Table Talk, signing out.